Open! Please!
These gates don't open for you anymore.
Christmas morning, she walked into my house wearing red like she owned the place, dragging Brandon behind her like some kind of trophy. Brandon, her co-worker who once asked to borrow my golf clubs and never returned them, stood in my foyer smirking while my wife held an envelope and a gift bag like she was starring in her own twisted reality show. "Morning," she chirped, fake brightness dripping from every word. "Merry Christmas." I glanced up from the fireplace. I already knew what was coming. The tension in her jaw, the arrogant tilt of Brandon's chin, the cologne he'd clearly bathed in. It wasn't even subtle anymore. Hadn't been for months. She handed me the envelope, thick with professionally printed tabs sticking out. Brandon leaned closer, that grin plastered across his face. "Time to pay up, buddy," he said with that smirk that made you want to test physics with his face. I took the papers, read exactly 3 words. Dissolution of marriage. My pen was already uncapped. I signed the first page, flipped to the signature line on the last page, signed again. Calm, methodical, quiet. She blinked. Brandon's smile faltered. That wasn't the script they'd rehearsed in whatever hotel room they'd been using. I stood and walked to the mantel, picked up a small wrapped box, silver paper with a red ribbon. I turned and handed it to her attorney, who was perched awkwardly on the edge of my couch, already looking like he regretted every life choice that led him here. "Got you something too," I said. He hesitated, then opened it slowly. Inside was one folded document, nothing flashy, no cover letter, no dramatic presentation, just a date-stamped sheet of legal paper with 4 signatures and 1 line highlighted in yellow. The man's face went completely white, like he'd just witnessed a car accident in slow motion, and realized he was sitting in the passenger seat. He leaned toward her, voice trembling. "You need to start begging. Right now." Her head whipped toward him. "What? Are you serious?" His hand was already shaking as he held the paper. "Where did he get this?" I smiled, but didn't answer, because how I obtained it didn't matter anymore. It existed, and it was legally valid. Buried deep in the partnership agreement her father had co-authored when her tech startup was still begging banks for seed funding was Clause 7.3, Limited Partner Override, signed by the silent investor, her own father. It was never removed, never updated, never even mentioned in subsequent rounds. Just sitting there, dormant, waiting for someone to notice it. And when she appointed Brandon as interim COO, after ethics concerns were raised, no less, her signature triggered an automatic review and succession vote. She had absolutely no idea what she'd actually signed. Or maybe she thought the clause was just legal decoration, something to make the document look official, not something that could burn her entire career to the ground. Brandon looked genuinely confused. "What the hell is going on?" I looked him dead in the eye. "I'm curious how many more business meetings you have scheduled at the Marriott downtown. Room 912, right? Same room as last Friday night." He flinched hard. She looked like someone had physically slapped her with a filing cabinet. This is the part where most men raise their voice, flip tables, cry, throw punches, beg for another chance. Not me. See, I'd already done the math years ago. I knew the exact moment Brandon started showing up in our daily life. Her jokes at dinner suddenly had his name in them more than mine. She started calling him her twin at work. Then it became partner. Then my other half. At some point, I stopped correcting her. I just started quietly collecting evidence. "Now, while you're here," I continued, "if you're actually listening this far, you should know that apparently over 90% of people don't subscribe even when they're following the whole story. The team behind this thrives on that support. Every interaction helps bring you stories exactly like this one. The kind that don't blink, don't stutter, and definitely don't forgive." Her lawyer reached for his phone. I raised an eyebrow. "You think calling someone will magically unsign a contract your client already activated?" He dropped the phone like it was burning hot coal. She tried to snatch the document from his hands. He pulled it back protectively. "You can't do this," she hissed. "No," I said calmly. "You already did it." Brandon tried to interject, playing peacemaker. "Look, maybe we can all—" I cut him off mid-sentence. "Did you expense the wine or did you expense the hotel room? Because I have the corporate card's quarterly summary and the internal audit logs sitting in my possession. I just want to know which line item you classified it under. Client development or personal expenses for morons?" He didn't answer. He couldn't answer. The color had drained from his face. "Enjoy your Christmas," I said, stepping aside. Then I walked out of my own living room, letting them sit there in the crushing quiet. The fire crackled behind them, and the fuse I'd been carefully lighting for months had just reached the explosive-marked succession clause. She scoffed immediately, the way people do when they're pretending not to hear a fire alarm. A little too loud, a little too quick, a little too desperate. "He's bluffing," she said, eyes darting to Brandon, who offered back a crooked smirk like this was just another awkward team-building exercise gone wrong. He probably printed that document himself, created it on his computer. Her lawyer didn't answer. He wasn't smirking anymore. He was hunched forward, knuckles white around the paper, his eyes darting over the text as if reading faster would somehow erase the words already etched in permanent ink. "Where exactly did you get this?" he asked me again, voice brittle and breaking. I shrugged casually, pouring myself a generous splash of scotch. "Doesn't matter at this point. It's signed, valid, legally binding. Yours is actually one of the signatures, if you're curious enough to look. Page 3, middle section." That's when he flipped to it frantically. His eyes locked on something specific and just stayed there, frozen. Clause 7.3. It wasn't buried in small print. It wasn't hidden in an appendix. It was highlighted in the original filing documents. Yellow marker, slightly faded from age, but still completely visible. Any officer promoted within a reporting line where a documented conflict of interest exists shall be subject to immediate vote of succession. All parties forfeit decision rights during the breach period. That was the official legal language. The real meaning was much simpler. If you sleep with your subordinate and promote him anyway, and your father happens to be a silent partner with override rights, you just voluntarily gave your crown away. Silently, permanently, months ago. The moment she signed Brandon's promotion memo, the countdown clock started ticking, and I was simply the person holding the stopwatch, watching the seconds expire. The thing about ethics investigations is they don't actually vanish into thin air. They just sit there quietly in filing cabinets and digital archives. Especially when the original accuser disappears with a settlement payment and an airtight non-disclosure agreement, which is exactly what happened with the junior graphic designer who left last quarter after filing a hostile work environment complaint specifically involving, you guessed it, Brandon. That complaint went directly to the ethics subcommittee. And while my wife happily signed off on Brandon's shiny new title and corner office, the ethics log still had his name flagged in the system. Yellow tagged under active review, promotion conflict, family interest clause 7.3, potentially applicable. She gave her father, who again owns 37% of her company, the legal equivalent of a loaded weapon, and then literally begged him to use it. And me? I simply handed him the ammunition and stepped back. Brandon glanced nervously at the lawyer. Wait. Are you actually saying this thing is legitimate and real? His voice cracked slightly on the word real, and I genuinely enjoyed hearing that. She looked back and forth between all of us desperately, then locked eyes with her lawyer. You specifically told me this clause was obsolete. Ancient history. You promised. He didn't answer her question. She leaned in closer, desperation creeping into her voice. You said it would be formally struck from the agreement in the next shareholder funding round. It was never struck, I said matter-of-factly. But I truly admire the confidence it must have taken to hand your own father the legal equivalent of a guillotine blade and then dance directly under it wearing heels. Brandon's face completely drained of color. Why would her dad ever sign something like that? That makes no sense. Now that was actually a better question, and the answer was remarkably simple. Her father didn't particularly like me, but he respected me deeply. A rare and important distinction. More importantly, he absolutely hated public embarrassment. He believed in family businesses the way some people believe in sacred bloodlines. And watching his daughter parade her extramarital affair around like it was a damn TED Talk presentation, that was more than enough to make even a silent partner start talking very loudly. Especially when he personally saw the surveillance photographs I'd collected. Especially when he read the time-stamped text message transcripts. Especially when he learned that Brandon had access to proprietary client pipeline database, using her executive credentials to reassign a lucrative contract under his own name for commission purposes. Oh yeah, I had documentation of that too, every single bite of it. So while she rolled her eyes and carefully prepared her little Christmas morning theater production, her father was sitting alone in his private study reading the comprehensive ethics report I'd quietly handed him personally one evening, glass of brandy in one hand, expensive fountain pen in the other. He signed the override clause authorization, then carefully handed me the original document. "Use this," he said simply. "If she ever forgets who actually built this company from nothing." She forgot. I most certainly didn't. Brandon shifted his weight uncomfortably. "Can't we, legally fight this in court or something?" The lawyer stood up slowly, deliberately. He didn't look at them with sympathy, just gathered his papers with methodical precision. "You can certainly try," he said flatly. "But the succession vote has to happen regardless. It's automatic now. And from what I've already heard through professional channels, the board of directors is already convening an emergency session." He looked directly at me, not with anger or resentment, but with professional respect and maybe just a touch of genuine fear. "You're not bluffing at all, are you?" I raised my glass slightly. "Merry Christmas to all?" He left without another single word, briefcase in hand. My wife stared after him. Her lips parted, but absolutely nothing came out. Her hands trembled visibly, not from the cold, but from the slowly dawning realization that she hadn't been outplayed by some brilliant strategy. She'd literally signed her own professional death warrant herself. Brandon, still awkwardly standing behind her, whispered urgently, "I thought you said your dad wouldn't care about any of this." She didn't answer him. She didn't need to, because we both knew perfectly well that her father cared immensely, especially about legacy and family reputation. And he had just made absolutely certain that hers would end in parentheses and footnotes. 3 months before Christmas morning, I found myself standing in a study lined with leather-bound books that nobody had actually touched in years, facing a man who once told me directly, "You're smart enough, but you weren't born smart." My father-in-law, Gregory Thornton. Silent majority investor. Self-made if you conveniently ignore the 2 substantial trust funds he started with at age 21. We had never genuinely liked each other. Mutual respect, perhaps. Affection, not even remotely possible. My handshake was always too firm for his refined taste, my tone too flat and direct. He didn't approve of how I dressed for family functions, how I spoke at dinner parties, or especially how I consistently refused to play the eager son-in-law game that involved kissing his ring. But there was one singular thing Gregory Thornton respected above absolutely everything else. Order, clean lines, signed contracts, zero drama or messiness. So when I handed him a comprehensive folder containing surveillance photographs, email printouts, hotel keycard access logs, and detailed expense receipts, all time-stamped down to the minute, cataloged by date, and cross-referenced with location data, he didn't huff indignantly or raise his voice at all. He just poured 2 fingers of aged scotch, slid 1 crystal glass across the mahogany table toward me, and sat down heavily. I didn't drink mine, just left it sitting there. He leafed through the damning contents completely silently, page by methodical page, his expression utterly unreadable. Occasionally he paused, once to frown deeply, once to smirk slightly, and once when he reached a text message where his own daughter called me, the old engine still somehow chugging along, he let out a long, weary sigh. "She's gotten incredibly sloppy," he muttered, folding the papers back into the folder carefully, "and sentimental in the worst possible way." "I think the more accurate word is entitled," I replied evenly. He didn't argue that assessment at all. Instead, he opened the bottom drawer of his antique desk, pulled out a battered manila envelope that looked decades old, and dropped it directly in front of me with a soft thud. It was thick, yellowed significantly at the edges, the flap sealed with a red wax sticker bearing the company's original founding seal. 2 hawks flanking a ceremonial torch. "I never showed this particular document to her," he said quietly. "Clause she doesn't know exists. Succession trigger mechanism. I had it drafted when she made Brandon head of the entire sales division last year. I had a feeling even then." "Why not use it immediately?" I asked. He met my eyes directly for the first time that entire evening. Because she hadn't humiliated the family publicly yet. She'd just insulted me privately and personally. I can live with personal insults. I've lived with them my entire life. But public disgrace? He pushed the sealed envelope toward me deliberately. "Use it when you need to. If she ever tries to gut this family publicly." Not a single second before that moment, I picked it up carefully. It felt substantially heavier than it physically looked. "I'm not your soldier or your weapon," I said clearly. He leaned back in his leather chair, swirling the last of his expensive drink thoughtfully. "No," he said, "you're something far more dangerous than any soldier. You're patient." And that was it. No warm handshake, no bonding moment between men. Just a cold, calculated transaction between two people who didn't particularly like each other, but understood perfectly the long-term value of documented consequences. I took the envelope home that night and placed it carefully in a fireproof safe behind the title deed to the house and a framed photograph of my son from his very first soccer game. I didn't look at it again, not even once. Not until Christmas morning arrived. The automatic glass doors of Thornton Dynamics headquarters hissed open at exactly 1:37 p.m. She didn't even pause at the reception desk, just stormed past security like panic itself had been issued a clearance badge. Her heels hit the marble tile like rapid gunshots. 4 senior executives in the main hallway pretended desperately not to see her. One abruptly turned into the break room, phone suddenly glued to his ear like it was surgically attached. She was frantically pulling up the company's corporate bylaws on her phone, scrolling with visibly shaking fingers, desperately searching for some loophole, some escape route, succession clause, her father's distinctive handwriting. She hadn't physically seen it since her very first investor pitch deck presentation years ago. That clause was symbolic, purely decorative, like an old family crest that nobody bothers to polish anymore. Now it was actively on fire. She hit the top floor. The executive boardroom loomed ahead through glass walls, cold and eerily quiet. The heavy oak double doors were already closed, but critically not locked. She didn't bother knocking. Inside, 12 men and women sat rigidly around a long stone-gray conference table. No laptops open, no coffee cups, no small talk. Just identical folders placed in front of each of them. Neat, deliberate, intentional. At the far end of the table sat her father, not moving. He didn't even glance in her direction when she entered. She opened her mouth to speak, maybe to shout, maybe to demand answers, but the chair of compliance cleared her throat sharply before a single syllable could escape. "We're currently in official session," the chair said flatly, without emotion. "Please take a seat immediately." Her mouth closed. She sat down mechanically in the empty chair. The folder positioned in front of her had one page clearly visible on top. A single line highlighted in bright yellow, Clause 7.3, triggered by internal ethics conflict and direct reporting line promotion without proper oversight. She went ice cold. The chair adjusted her reading glasses professionally, reading aloud from prepared notes. Per the override clause originally filed and officially sealed by silent partner Thornton and formally ratified in Q2 of last fiscal year, the appointment of any executive officer with an active or pending internal ethics complaint, if co-signed by a related party without full board consultation, constitutes immediate grounds for mandatory succession review. She wanted desperately to say it wasn't active anymore, that the complaint had been properly resolved and closed. But the complaint hadn't actually been closed at all, just quietly paid off and buried. And now it definitely wasn't quiet anymore. The chair continued reading mechanically. Due diligence review shows that the co-signer, Miss Thornton, personally approved the executive promotion of Mr. Brandon Mitchell, while such a complaint was actively pending and without mandatory full board consultation as required by corporate governance standards. She turned her head toward her father desperately. He still hadn't looked at her even once, hadn't moved, just sat there like a statue. The chair spoke again, calm and obviously well-practiced. Per comprehensive legal review, the clause is binding, has been previously ratified by majority vote, and meets all required quorum standards. As such, we now formally invoke a mandatory succession vote effective immediately. We will now nominate a successor to assume all interim COO responsibilities. The nominee, she paused deliberately and glanced down at her notes, is Mr. Edward Hayes. Her jaw physically tightened. Edward, the compliance director. The single most boring, painfully ethical man alive. She'd once called him Ascension Clipboard with legs during an off-site retreat, directly to his face. Brandon had been actively grooming him for a quiet exit. Now Edward was taking Brandon's entire job. "Any objections to the nomination?" the chair asked formally. Complete silence filled the room. She tried desperately. "Wait, you can't just all in favor of the nomination?" The chair pressed forward, completely ignoring her. 12 hands went up simultaneously, including her father's hand. Unanimous. Complete. The gavel hit the table once with finality. The moment succession triggered officially, Brandon was immediately out. She was suspended indefinitely pending full compliance review. All access credentials frozen, all executive privileges formally revoked. Compensation paused until review completion. The The clause was absolutely brutal in its precise wording, clinical and cold, like an obituary written by corporate lawyers. A single page slid directly in front of her. She stared at it blankly. "Sign here to formally acknowledge receipt," the chair instructed. "This is not an admission of wrongdoing, only confirmation that the vote has officially occurred and been recorded." She looked desperately to her father one final time. Finally, he moved slightly, sipping his water slowly. Still hadn't actually looked at her directly, but the corner of his mouth twitched almost imperceptibly. Not quite a smile, just gravity, pulling everything back to where it properly belonged. She signed with a shaking hand, then stood up mechanically. No one told her to leave. She just instinctively knew. As she exited through the glass doors, she passed Brandon standing alone in the hallway, looking genuinely confused and lost. "Did you stop it?" he asked desperately. She didn't answer him, and he didn't ask again because by then, he was already reaching automatically for his security keycard. And it didn't beep green anymore. Just flashed red with access denied. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon when she finally pulled into the long driveway. Cold winter air, thin and sharp, clung to the pine trees lining the edge of the property. She hit the remote button on her car's visor automatically. The security gate didn't budge even slightly. No beep, no mechanical whir, just complete silence. She hit the button again, harder this time. Nothing at all. Then, a message popped up on her car's dashboard screen. "Access denied. Security code invalid." Her hand hovered in midair for several seconds longer than it should have, like her brain physically couldn't process a world where her personal security code simply didn't work anymore. She reversed the car, parked outside the gate completely, and walked the rest of the distance. The stone path leading to the front door had been recently cleared and salted. Efficient, sterile, professional. Like someone had taken meticulous care of it specifically for expected guests, just not for her. The motion sensor porch lights clicked on automatically as she approached. They felt somehow accusatory, like they were judging her. Sitting on the welcome mat was a cardboard box, nothing remotely sentimental inside. No jewelry, no love letters, not even a toothbrush. Just a few folded clothes, some travel-sized toiletries, and one broken picture frame containing a faded photograph of the three of us, her, me, and our son, taken at a fall carnival 6 years ago. She was captured mid-laugh in the photo. I was already looking away from the camera. Taped directly to the front door was one envelope, plain white, sealed with a single piece of blue painter's tape, the kind you'd use for trim work. Her name written in block letters. No dear, no warmth whatsoever. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a copy of the prenuptial agreement, but not the simplified version her lawyer had briefly reviewed before the wedding ceremony. This version was heavily annotated. Yellow highlights everywhere, margin notes, colored stickers like it had been carefully studied and taught in law school. Her own amendments were circled in red ink. She'd completely forgotten how many specific clauses she'd personally pushed for during negotiations, how hard she'd fought to include them, so incredibly proud of her own foresight at the time. Clause 12. In the documented event of extramarital activity confirmed by independent evidence, primary residence rights immediately revert to the uninvolved party. Clause 14. Any marital asset contributed specifically by inheritance or pre-existing family trust shall not be subject to division unless co-signed ownership is properly documented in writing. Clause 17F. If infidelity is proven through documentation, the involved party permanently forfeits any residual claim to estate disbursements tied to family-held business equity. Back then, she'd insisted confidently, "I just want to protect what I'm bringing into this marriage. It's only fair and reasonable." I had simply nodded and signed, never argued once. She never thought for a second they'd be used against her. But there it was, clear as day. At the bottom of the page, a handwritten note in my distinctive writing. Photographs enclosed, dates included. Witness list appended for verification. She flipped through the attached packet with growing horror. Hotel receipts with timestamps, surveillance photographs with date stamps, her entire text thread with Brandon printed out completely. Key messages highlighted in yellow, one in particular standing out. "He won't fight back, he never fights. That's exactly what makes this so easy." Next page, a notarized legal form, filed effective immediately. Her breath physically caught in her throat. She dropped all the papers, clutched desperately at the door handle. It didn't turn at all. Locked completely. She rang the doorbell frantically. Nothing. Rang it again, holding the button. knocked hard, then pounded with her fists desperately. The house didn't answer at all. Through the frosted glass panels, she could barely make out the familiar hallway, the edge of the main staircase, the corner of an expensive rug. Familiar and now completely foreign simultaneously. It looked exactly like a museum display. The home was gone entirely. All that remained was property, and absolutely none of it belonged to her. She fumbled with her phone, called my number. Straight to voicemail immediately. Tried again, desperately. Still nothing. Tried calling our son. No answer there either. Her legs finally gave out. She sat down hard on the cold porch step, the freezing temperature seeping into her bones, into her skin like punishment. She stared at the cardboard box beside her, then the locked door, then the blue tape. It had always been there, documented in the contracts, the legal forms, the files she'd barely skimmed while smiling confidently across the dinner table. I hadn't trapped her at all. She'd drawn the blueprint herself, signed every page, and all I did was follow her instructions exactly. By morning, the silence was no longer confined just to the house. It was absolutely everywhere now. She sat cross-legged on a generic hotel bed, comforter pushed aside, cell phone glowing like a lifeline that wouldn't hold. She scrolled through her entire contacts list, thumb hovering over names that used to mean something important. Old brunch groups, co-workers she'd personally mentored, high school friends she'd never bothered to unfriend. Call. No answer. Call. Voicemail. Call. This number is no longer accepting calls. Even her own sister. Her sister didn't pick up. That one genuinely stung deep. They used to talk religiously every Sunday, wine glass in hand, venting about their respective husbands. The irony made her physically gag now. She finally got through to someone. Jennifer, college roommate, worked in private wealth management now. The kind of person who always sounded like she was perpetually mid-latte. Hey, she breathed with relief. Thank God someone actually picked up. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Jennifer spoke, measured and careful. I heard about the board vote. It's everywhere. She tried desperately to sound casual and unconcerned. Oh yeah, it's being handled. Legal process. Another pause, noticeably longer this time. You should know something, Jennifer said quietly. Your emails are going around. Internal ones from your company servers. Her heart twisted painfully. What do you mean exactly? I mean forwarded, shared, leaked. There's a chain email thread, a really long one actually. That's completely illegal. That's HR's problem now. But I thought you should see this yourself. A message pinged her inbox immediately. Subject line. Just so you're aware. She opened it with dread. A screenshot at the top. Her name, Brandon's name. The subject line. The blueprint. It was a Slack thread. Private channel. Archived, but critically not deleted. Brandon. He's completely harmless. Been watching him for years. Man barely reacts to anything. Her. Exactly. That's why it'll work perfectly. He never pushes back. He's too old school, just signs whatever and disappears. Brandon. So we're still good to clear out the estate before Q4 ends? Her. Already prepping all the filings. He won't even notice until his keycard stops working. Using the old man's passivity is honestly the only thing that's made this bearable. Beneath that, someone had highlighted her message in bright yellow. Using the old man's passivity. She dropped the phone like it burned her. The old man? Her husband. She hadn't written that to be genuinely cruel, not intentionally malicious. It was just a joke, a vent to a coworker. But jokes don't get forgotten, especially when they age like milk and leak during corporate email audits. The call came just before noon, right when she'd almost convinced herself there was still something salvageable. Her phone rang. Finally, her lawyer, Mitchell Barnes. Polished, expensive, and until 24 hours ago, supremely confident that she held the upper hand. Mitchell, she answered, expecting strategy and options. He sighed heavily. It wasn't performative. It was genuine. I can't represent you anymore. I'm terminating our agreement. The words didn't register immediately. Excuse me? I'm invoking Clause 5C, termination upon discovery of unreconcilable material misrepresentation by client. Her voice snapped to high alert. What misrepresentation? Another pause. I read the full packet, the trustee documents, the estate transfers, the communications you sent on company time, the compliance reports, the prenup you forced him to sign, annotated with your own handwriting, the Slack threads, the memo about clearing out the estate. You gave him everything he needed. So that's it? You just walk? I'm protecting myself. he said calmly. If I stay on, I risk being named in a discovery motion. You know who he hired? Lawrence Mitchell. She froze completely. Mitchell was a corporate litigator with a notorious reputation for dissecting opponents like a surgeon with an old grudge. Mitchell, wait. You abandoned yourself months ago. You just didn't notice until now. He hung up. The courthouse clerk was patient but absolutely firm. She tried to file an emergency injunction on the house. He typed her information, then stopped abruptly. Your name's not on the title. It's our house. We lived there 9 years. He pulled up a PDF, rotated the monitor. Original deed filed in 1989, transferred via living trust in 2004 to current title holder, your husband. You signed a disclaimer deed in 2015. You waived any ownership claim to avoid retitling delays. She remembered that day. Their son had a fever. They were rushing. The notary had said, just sign here and we'll finalize by lunch. It hadn't seemed important. But we were married. That should count. You can challenge it. But ma'am, legally, you were never an owner. Not once. The word never hit like a metal door slamming shut forever. The envelope arrived in complete silence days later. Deep green, heavy stock, sealed with red wax. The Thornton family crest. Inside, a Christmas card. Glossy, professional. Me on the porch. Our son beside me, arms around my shoulders. And Gregory Thornton, her father, holding a crystal glass, smiling genuinely. All three of us laughing together. Below the photo in elegant cursive, thank you for the gift. We've moved on. Another sheet fell out. Legal paper, stamped and notarized. Notice of disbursement reallocation. Thornton Family Trust. Per Clause 14D, removal due to public dishonor and breach of familial code of conduct. All pending and future disbursements allocated to redacted Thornton shall be permanently redirected to beneficiaries 2 and 3. Her name was gone. Erased. Not even in bold font. Just removed. She was once the heir. The only daughter. Now she wasn't legacy. She wasn't listed. She was excised. Not out of rage, because shame, public shame, was the one sin her father never forgave. This wasn't revenge. This was extraction. Strategic, clean, surgical. Days later, she drove to her father's estate. The iron gate was open. She didn't wait. Pushed through the double doors. Her father's study was lit. He stood at the window, pouring tea, hands steady. Same cardigan, same stillness. She slammed the door. You went too far. He didn't turn. No, you did. You erased me from everything. I filed an update. Erasure requires malice. This was procedure. You gave him every tool to destroy me. He didn't destroy you. He revealed you. You chose him over your own daughter. Now he turned. Not angry, just old and finished. I didn't choose him. I chose dignity. He placed the teapot down. You mocked him for being quiet, for being steady. You joked about clearing out the estate. I raised you to win with competence, not performance. You act like I betrayed you. You did, he snapped, the only edge he'd shown. You thought this was about marriage. It was about family, about what our name meant. You took a man who never asked for credit, never demanded recognition, and made him a joke. You humiliated someone who carried this family's name with more grace than you ever learned. He's not blood. Her father stared coldly. No, he's not. But when the storm came, he built a wall. You lit a match. I was your daughter. You still are. But that doesn't grant you immunity from consequences. She threw the Christmas card onto his desk. That was cruel. That was closure. You don't even regret it. I regret that I didn't teach you sooner how expensive shame can be. The room fell completely silent. Outside, distant fireworks marked the new year arriving. She turned to leave. At the door, she paused one final time. You really think he deserved all this? Her father didn't look at her, just sipped his tea slowly. He never raised his hand. He asked for nothing until you took everything. She stepped into the hallway, her footsteps echoing alone. Not because they hated her, but because the silence she'd mocked had done its job perfectly.